Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our School of Education Research and Teaching Festival. I want to give credit to Tom DeLuca for calling it a festival, came up with that a few years ago. We've been doing this for a while now, and I hope you will agree that this is a great way to get to know what our colleagues are doing and a great way to see the range and brilliance of the research that's happening in the School of Education and Human Sciences. I think you all know me, but I'm Lisa Wolf-Wendell. I'm the Associate Dean for Research and Grad Studies. I have a few sort of announcements to sort of before we kick off. And so I just want to make sure that you sort of heed these potential things that are happening now and in the future. So first of all, scholarship application deadline is Tuesday by 5 p.m. That's the 21st. Students have had since early December to complete these, but as happens, probably many students are working on those applications right now. If they're a graduate student, they will need to have a letter of recommendation or one of those recommendation forms from one of you. Please, please, please maybe send out an email today to your students reminding them to get them in. This is the only way to qualify for School of Education and Human Sciences scholarships for continuing students. We would like to fund as many students as we can. So please encourage them to get those applications in. And please, if you're a referee for them, please get your application in as well. And special thanks in advance to the scholarship committee for all the work they're going to do soon. In addition, the School of Ed and Human Sciences is offering their internal research and summer writing grants. Those are due on February 24th, which is coming up. Dina Evans, as always, has offered to help people with budgets. And this year, we are open to giving more than one summer writing grant per department. In the past, we've limited those. So technically speaking, you were supposed to have your grant into your department chair a week before the deadline, but we do want to encourage everyone who wants to apply for a grant to do so. So work with your chair if you're a little bit behind that deadline. We really do want to encourage you to submit a research grant and get funding from the School of Ed. If you're a new faculty member in your first 2 years here, we encourage you to apply for the new faculty research development grants through KUCR. And I'm happy to provide more information about those. Just put in your head, it's a thesis and dissertation season, and we will have, as always, the thesis and dissertation of the year awards nominations coming up. So as you're sitting in someone's committee and they're just saying, wow, this is brilliant, please think about nominating them for that award. Also, upcoming awards for faculty, there's the teaching, the research, both the early research and the more senior research award, service, DEIB, a staff award, and the Budig teaching award. Those nominations have not come out yet, or the call has not come out yet, but be thinking about nominating your colleagues for these prestigious and recognitions for their hard work. I know that those nominations take a while to put together. We tried to simplify it as much as we can, but please think about nominating your colleagues. Couple other quick things. Every other Thursday in the community room, we are hosting a writing accountability session from 9 to noon. It's drop by. We provide donuts and coffee and tea and just a chance for fellowship and support. If you're working on a writing project, those are open to anyone. So please come on by if you can. We did one this Thursday, so it'll be 2 weeks from now. And then we're going to host a number of summer camps for you all. There will be the tech camp, as always, a DEIB camp, a innovation incubator camp, and probably a grant writing camp. So and a future leader camp. So for someone who might be thinking about one day wanting to be a department chair or take on a leadership role at the university or in the school, we will also do some professional development surrounding that. We are currently revising our faculty mentoring plan in light of all of the new hires. And I just want to give a thank you to everyone who has been so supportive of your departments and going out to all of those meals and hosting people and an exercise, and we're going to do an exercise camp to help you work off all of the fun stuff. Two other things, and then I'm going to turn it over. There are numerous faculty development events being offered centrally through the Office of Faculty Affairs. One I just want to call your attention to, if you're a associate professor and you're thinking about going up for promotion imminently, there is a 3-part coaching circle that I'm a part of. I encourage you to sign up or encourage your colleagues to sign up. It starts next week, and will actually help people write their teaching and research statements and look at those criteria, et cetera. So it should be helpful, and I encourage anyone who's thinking about going up for promotion to full imminently to do that. There are other ones as well. I want to encourage people, faculty and grad students, to get involved at the NCFDD, the National Center for Faculty Diversity and Development. I might have those 2 Ds backwards. We have a subscription that KU pays for, and they provide all kinds of mentoring support, webinars, weekly writing reminders, writing retreats, all kinds of things. So please make use of those services. And lastly, we have travel grants available for travel and research grants available for undergraduates and graduate students who are traveling. So please encourage students. We've had pretty good use of those this year, but if you know of a student who's going to a conference with you, for professional development or presenting, please encourage them to apply for those. That's a lot of announcements. I appreciate you're doing this. The way this is going to work, Imbalia Thomas is going to come up first. Each speaker has 5 minutes and 1 slide to give their presentation. Then we'll have 5 minutes for question and answer, and then we'll move on to the next one. I ask all of the speakers, if someone has a question on chat, which I will try to monitor, or someone has a question from the audience, please repeat the question, because the people on Zoom will not be able to hear the question. Thank you. And Imbalia, take it away.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Imbalia, and I am going to talk about a project that I'm doing that was funded not through the School of Ed, though I've got a really generous funding to do another project on mindfulness in my undergraduate class, and research is going really well. But I thought, because it's Black History Month, I'd talk about a project that was funded through the History of the Black Writing Project over in the college, run by Mary Emma Graham. So this project is called Forgotten Everyday Writers, A History of Black Writing in Lawrence, Kansas. And I'm just going to read a little bit about what I wrote regarding this project. This Forgotten Everyday Writers addresses the written and, sorry, let me try that again. The History of the Black Writing Project that Mary Emma Graham organizes addresses the written and published literary works of Black writers. This project, the Forgotten Everyday Writers Project, has 3 aims. The project seeks to recover, showcase the everyday creativity of Black American writing that surfaces in Kansas newspapers, specifically Lawrence and the surrounding areas during the 1860s through the 1920s, a period that represents the transition from slavery to the Reconstruction era, the Gilded Age, and the Progressive era. The project also aims to liberate the American and academic imagination from the historic and continual deficit discussions of absent literacy skills and practices among African Americans. I'm going to put down the paper because that's technical talk, but I'll give you a little bit of personal reasons for this project. As many of you know, you've been reading the news, a lot of history, especially African American history, is being erased in textbooks. We now celebrate Juneteenth as a national holiday. It's not something that I grew up celebrating in the South, in Atlanta. It just was a holiday that was familiar to going out west, California. So this past summer, I was born, and I actually attended a Juneteenth. I actually learned something new. Many of you are probably already familiar with. Is this notion of exodus. How many know what exoduster is? Maybe not everybody. Well, that makes me feel a little bit better. So exodusters, as I learned, were African Americans who came mostly south and migrated and they settled in places like Lawrence. I did not know that there were Black people in Lawrence after the Civil War. Kansas City was completely new to me coming from Georgia. And so I was learning about some of these individuals and when the school carried out in North Lawrence. It was an exciting experience. I learned a lot about history. But one of the things that occurred to me as someone who works in the School of Education is, how did you get these individuals have been enslaved? How did they start school? How were they educated? What was that process of acquiring literacy skills? And so I started doing a little bit of digging after Juneteenth. I began to learn about African American literary society. I knew about these societies. I knew that they were very progressive. They were founded on progressive principles. But what I didn't know was how they actively worked to encourage literacy. And that's what this project is about. It's really about digging through old newspapers. A number of them are African American newspapers that were published before. And in these papers surface children's stories, indignant letters of people writing and saying, we're citizens, we have rights to do these things, right? There are all kinds of literacy practices that surface in the newspaper. And so what I'm doing is going through and digging through these newspapers, and I'm finding what kinds of things people are writing about and are publishing about and talking about during this time. It's a fascinating work. I've got items on screen to kind of give you an idea of who I'm talking about. You know about Langston Hughes. We have a story written by his mother when she was 11 years old. So it's just really intriguing to kind of pull apart this idea of who was able to read and write at certain periods of history. And that's what this project is about. It's a digital humanities project, something that not everybody in the School of Ed is engaging in, but it's a fascinating way to get history public to lots of readers. So that's it. Question? Yes, Kelly. Like more about more. So the question is, where can people learn more about this project? Well, this is going to take a really long time to curate. So I would say in about a year, check back. The goal, if you see the little outline on the screen, is to create a Omeka project where people can kind of access the website and they can walk through this project like a museum exhibit. My hope is to actually create an exhibit here somewhere here in Lawrence at the Spencer to really showcase some of the images and the letters that are found on screen. So it's going to take me at least a year to probably 2 years to have something really concrete for people to look at. Great. Yes. So this black and white photo, sure. So the question is there a connection between Nicodemus and kind of what I'm talking about? And the answer is yes. So the photo, black and white photo on screen is actually from Nicodemus. And the connection is that you have these exodusters, these Black people who came mostly from the South, but also from free areas of the US and came to Kansas for land, for the promise of freedom, to help with the cause of creating a non-slave state and starting life. And so Nicodemus was just a town that was further west, but people basically stopped at different points from Lawrence to Topeka and other cities moving towards freedom and land and purpose. So yes, there is a connection. And if you haven't been to Nicodemus, it's worth stopping through. It's a wonderful town. The best way to get there is to plan a trip to Boulder and just drive to Nicodemus on your way to Boulder. And then you have plenty of time. There's no place really out there to stay, but it's really worth the visit. Yes. Yes, I think it's at the beginning of sometime in July. So the question about the family reunions that take place in Nicodemus, it's amazing to kind of see people come from all over the country to come back to this town where they have ancestors. And I think there are literally like 13 to 20 families still left in Nicodemus. If you Google Nicodemus, you'll see a story about a Black woman and her daughter who returned to the town to live with their mom. She is the park ranger at Nicodemus. And literally, if you go to Nicodemus today, she is there. So, you know, it's a town that's still living, but that, you know, its residents are much older. And so they're working to kind of create a way for the town to become a part of the tourist attraction of Kansas, but it's off the beaten path. And so it's hard to do that. Yeah. Yeah, it is a significant historic town. I think it's the first or the oldest Black settlement still in existence today. I saw a hand in the back, or no, did I not? Yeah, okay. Oh, all I know is it's west. I've been there. I don't know where, but it's west. It's before you get to Colorado. Yes. Anyone else? Yes. I think there's one other thing that I want to say, and part of my work as an applied linguist is I'm focused on not literary writing, because that gets talked about a lot, but everyday creative writing. And that's why I'm focused on the kinds of stories that I'm focused on. So it's these children's stories, it's the letters to the editors, it's like scandals regarding writing, but it's also this history of upper class, bougie, Black society that really does take an active role in kind of fostering what happens with education amongst Black Americans. And I think that's a part of history that's not often told. And I think as a school of education, it's really important that the stories and histories of education are really promoted and discussed, or else we forget the different kinds of literacy practices that exist, or how literacy has come about within a society, because not everybody was literate in the country across races. And so it's really fascinating to think about how we've become a literate society. Thank you. I'm not quite sure how to do that.
Gotcha.
Oh,
Just make sure to talk into this.
Close all tabs.
Yeah, I could try that.
Then
No,
it's
do you
that,
have
that
yours?
dinging.
Yours should
Can
be
I close out your emails, the dinging?
No,
You need it?
no, you can look at my.
Okay.
I want to get rid of that.
All right, where am I at? Right here.
All right. All right.
All
Ready for
right.
me?
Yeah.
All right. Go for it, Grant. I'll let you.
Trent Herta, professor, exercise science. Hudson Herta's dad, he's at home sick today. The 7-year-old is very interested to watch me. Far less interesting in 2 minutes from now, I'm sure. What our lab has worked on in the past 5 to 8 years is outlining the role of skeletal muscle lipids in physical performance and now metabolic deficits, and tying that to the youth and how that might affect them in the future. So on the left side, I have a lot of data here. On the left side with ultrasound images, we can get a relative area of lipid contents in a muscle. The relative area of those lipids associates with poor physical performance at faster velocities. And you're probably like, who cares? That's how we maintain stability. Faster you run, performance is going to be decreased with the lipids. It actually creates a mechanical effect. So there's less known about this than what I'm going to talk about next. But ultimately, lipids in the muscle has been outlined in adults with biopsies, then also with modeling, and then lipid ejections in rodents. And we notice muscular power decreases. Our lab is the first to show this is happening in youth 8 to 10 years old who may have excessive lipids in the muscle. So at faster velocities, they do have lower muscular power, which is very similar to our aging data. Also, lipids for a long time has been known to be associated with insulin resistance and risk for type 2 diabetes. Lipids in the muscle do create inflammation. The issue there, though, is we don't always know why or how the lipids are causing this. For instance, we can do an exercise program and improve your insulin sensitivity, but the lipid concentrations don't change. So it's more about the composition and the health of the lipids. So in youth, we can't take muscle biopsies to further answer these questions that we have. So we spent the last 2 or 3 years in funding from the School of Ed and funding from the NSCA, National Strength and Conditioning Association, to develop imaging techniques at Hoagland. Hoagland's also put a lot of money behind this. So we can now image with spectroscopy the lipid profiles of a muscle. Advantages, even over biopsies, is the fact we can get concentrations of lipids outside the fibers and also inside the fibers in the muscle. Along with those concentrations, we can get what we call the saturation level of those lipids. The saturation level of those lipids is associated with inflammation, and inflammation is ultimately what sets off that type 2 diabetes story, insulin resistance story. So we did some pilot work looking at children who are overweight, so 8 to 11 years old, 8 to 10 years old, versus children who are normal weight. It's interesting, so the profiles would tell us that the concentrations of lipids outside the fibers, this big peak right here, which we have, most of our lipids will be outside the fibers in our muscles, was much, much higher in the overweight children. The concentration of lipids inside the fibers actually were not different. Also, the saturation level of the lipids inside the fiber were higher too. So that's what we would believe would be leading to insulin resistance. Also, the next step is we have these associations. How can we manipulate this in human children? One of the problems with this research is we can't do this in rodents. The maturation of rodents is so quick that we actually can't get this information. So, years ago, I started on the process to do this in rodents, and it came to a wall and got blocked there too. And that's when Hoagland really got interested in telling this story and building these processes for us at the Med Center. So the second part is, okay, how can we manipulate this lipid profile to further test if insulin resistance is really responding to these saturation levels and muscular power is really responding to the lipids outside the fibers? So we did resistance exercise training. You go in our building, this is all you hear about. It is a very potent exercise. So in these 8 to 10-year-olds, they did traditional linear periodization. They lifted weights, and the saturation levels of the lipids inside the fibers did go down. So did the concentration of the lipids also went down. Now, this wasn't a subset, the imaging, but all 20 children did complete the resistance training protocol. Some of you might have some questions about that. So a little bit is like, just so what? Like, why do we care so much about these 8 and 10-year-olds and these lipids in their muscle? We know bone health across our lifespan is set by what it is before we go to puberty. We can do things to help us. So if you remain sedentary, your bone health is going to be pretty poor at the end of life. We can do things to increase bone mineral density. We're trying to tell that story with skeletal muscle. If inflammation is in the muscle because of saturation of the lipids, it's going to limit muscular fiber growth, which then is going to further limit the sink that your glucose goes into, which is insulin sensitivity. So we need glucose go in the muscle, smaller muscle, you're more likely to be type 2 diabetic. Also, it's going to impact muscular strength and power. So they're going to be physically disabled earlier in the lifespan because of how their muscles environment is when they're younger. And the very last thing, it isn't always about body size. I don't have this figure on there. 40% of the variance in the lipid saturation and EMC concentration is physical activity. So we've been monitoring them with watches. So that's another piece of the puzzle that the Med Center and Children's Mercy is very interested in. Right. Thank you. Hudson, are you still interested? Any questions?
How does this compete with 48?
Does this information apply to adults? It absolutely does. So you can do resistance training. We'll do a lot of the same manipulation that we just showed in these youth. One advantage of this is the fact that the spectroscopy is really helpful in understanding the locations of the lipids because it's not always easily attainable with even muscle fiber biopsy. So obviously we're not going to do biopsies in kids, but there's actually advantages to be able to do this imaging in adults too.
This is reflecting on the application that can be older than the other.
Yeah, it'd be the fasted glucose. Oh, so how would this relate to maybe the lipid profiles we get? from our biometric screenings. It'd be fasted glucose. So this is simply just fasted glucose. With our grant applications, we are doing better measures of muscle insulin resistance with tolerance tests. But yeah, yep. Yep. I'm so glad you asked that. You know what? Kids love throwing medicine balls. All 20 kids. So in our net, we're doing this again this summer, and we are going to do surveys of the kids.
No,
And the
I haven't.
enjoyment of it. Kids like lifting weights, honestly. Out of the 21 kids who started and completed the program 3 days a week, I would say only 2 or 3 really didn't want to be there. The majority do. I'll also say this data, that data set represent the the BMI of the population was represented in that data set. So we had 8 or 9 overweight kids and they had no issues with it. So it is progressive. We go from leg press, we go from med ball squats to leg press to deadlift squats, and they do it all. So they have no issues really.
Gonna follow up. You find, or do you think that you find better than others?
I think we kind of know that. I say this in front of Dr. Fry too. I think he knows what I'm going to say. Whole body, getting the core involved. I think there is probably enough data out there, I would think. And he could probably shake his head yes or no that doing the machine circuit when you're not using your core is probably a disservice. So if you can squat and pick kettlebells off the ground, is probably what you should be doing. Use as much muscle as possible. No, well, that's another strength of this research is it's in an age where there are no gender differences. There's no sex differences in strength or any of this at this point. Through puberty, that's when those differences will start going. Yeah. Yeah, actually, so one of our first papers from this project, bone marrow density did increase across the board for lower body for the resistance train, which was actually kind of surprising. We didn't know that was going to happen. The controls did not have increases in bone marrow density. So, all right. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Megan Patterson, and I'm going to be talking today about some work I conducted in collaboration with Lisa Rosen, Elizabeth England, and Morgan Benoit. We know from research with adults that women are often more reluctant or less likely to negotiate than men are when they're in a situation in which negotiation is called for. So, for example, asking for a higher salary after being offered a job, or trying to get a lower price when making a purchase. We also know that women are often, although not always, less successful when they do attempt to negotiate, so less likely to get what they want out of a negotiation. And there are a variety of different factors that could contribute to these gender discrepancies. But one factor might be that women who attempt to negotiate on behalf of themselves may be perceived more negatively than men who engage in the same behavior. So a behavior that's perceived as appropriately assertive for a man might lead to a woman being perceived as pushy or not a team player. And so these gendered perceptions may contribute to women's lower success in negotiations, and women being aware of these gendered perceptions and wanting to avoid them might also contribute to women being less likely to negotiate. So we know this from research with adults. What I wanted to look at in this project with my collaborators was, what do we see in terms of perceptions of negotiation behaviors in children? Do we see these same kinds of patterns? So that's what we wanted to do. So in order to examine this question, we created a series of videos. In these videos, we have children playing a game that gives them opportunities to negotiate. So in this game, children are interacting with an adult research assistant, that's Elizabeth right up there, and they are portraying themselves as an art dealer. So the kid and both players are art dealers. You get a set of pictures, you can sell the pictures for tokens. Whoever gets the most tokens at the end wins. And so we had 4 different videos that reflected 4 different experimental conditions. We had a girl who negotiated, a girl who didn't negotiate, a boy who negotiated, a boy who didn't negotiate. And after participants watch these videos, these are adult participants watching these videos, and we ask them their perceptions of the kids in the video. So rate how much the kid in the video has all these different qualities. And we were particularly interested in two different areas. One is agentic characteristics, and one is communal characteristics. So agentic characteristics are characteristics that are associated with individual success and goal attainment, things like independence and assertiveness. Communal characteristics are characteristics that are associated with having positive relationships with other people, like kindness, friendliness, compassion. So we wanted to see how were children perceived as having these different kinds of characteristics based on their behavior in this game. And in talking about the results, I'm going to focus on two of the four conditions, which is the girl who negotiated and the boy who did not negotiate, because those are the situations that are sort of inconsistent with the gendered expectations we would have. So the girl who negotiated, compared to the other three conditions, she was viewed, first of all, as the most competent. So we have one question that's just how good was the kid at the game? Girl who negotiated is viewed as more competent than any of the other players, including the boy who negotiates. And again, these are scripted interactions. So the girl who negotiates and the boy who negotiates do exactly the same thing. She's also viewed as the highest in positive agentic characteristics. So these are things like being assertive, intelligent, logical, but also highest in negative agentic characteristics like bossy and aggressive. She is also viewed as the lowest in negative communal characteristics. So these are things like weak or easily pushed around. The boy who doesn't negotiate, on the other hand, is viewed as least competent. Now, again, so he's being viewed as less competent than the girl who doesn't negotiate, even though they're doing the exact same thing. He's viewed as lowest in positive agentic characteristics and highest in negative communal characteristics. So I think both of these suggest that these kids are being judged in their behaviors relative to gendered expectations. Just as a quick note here, we did look in this study for effects of participant gender and also participants' gender role attitudes, and we didn't really find very many effects. So I think that sort of suggests that children's gender is affecting the way that they're perceived in these negotiation situations, even among participants who have fairly egalitarian, explicit gender role. Questions? Yes, Lisa.
For all
Yes. So who were the children depicted in the video? So yes, the children depicted, these are the two children depicted in the video. So yes, all of the children depicted in the videos were white. I think absolutely if you added a racial element and you know, people ask things like, well, does it matter if they're interacting with an adult versus a child? Does it matter if they're interacting with a man versus a woman, race, all of these things? I'm sure all of those things do matter. This is our first study. So we intentionally had both children be white because we wanted to kind of control for that. I do think it's certainly possible that race would impact perceptions as well, you know, given what we know about the intersectionality of gender and racial stereotypes. Yeah, and Gandhi? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, so Gandhi's asking sort of about the cultural element of this, of whether it's appropriate for children to negotiate and particularly to try to negotiate with adults, right? And I think that's absolutely, you know, culturally influenced, even within the US, within, you know, subcultures, that's going to be more acceptable than others. You know, people thinking about Annette LaRue here, right? Like in that idea that in middle class culture, the idea of children advocating for themselves, trying to negotiate with their parents, trying to negotiate with other adults is going to be more accepted than maybe in some other populations. So I do think that could be a thing that could impact people's perceptions of the children beyond their gender. Yeah. Eric. So who were the participants in this study? So these are all adult participants. These are college students. We drew them from a variety of universities, including KU, but it's a college student sample. So all adults who are rating these participants, and each, this is maybe not clear, but each participant just saw one video. So we thought if we showed them multiple videos and tried to do kind of a within subjects design, then the purpose of the study would be obvious, right? So each participant is only in one condition. We have about, I think it's about 600 participants, so about 150 participants per condition.
Did you analyze their rating?
We did, yes. So we looked at the impact of participant gender and didn't really find much in the way of effect. So it wasn't that, you know, men were more biased in their judgments than women were. It is a plug for SONA, absolutely. People, please ask your students to do SONA research participation for course credit so that they can be in my study. And more importantly, can be in our graduate student study.
More important, they have access.
Yes, yes, absolutely. All right, thank you.
Take that one down. Where are you? Perfect. Just make sure it's up.
Good afternoon, everyone. One, it's a pleasure to be here, and I want to talk to you a little bit about what Trent brought up a few minutes ago. And that is this exercise method, strength training or resistance exercise, which I think is often oversimplified and people don't understand some of the complexities. This is work that's been, we've been working on for the last few years, myself and some of my current and former students. But also it involves some colleagues that we've developed a relationship with at the University of California, San Diego. Their interest is somewhat similar, but also different. We're interested in understanding what goes on in the training hall. You do the sets, the reps, the exercises, understanding what are the mechanical characteristics that differentiate different types of strength training. They're interested because they work at the cellular and molecular levels. And so they are trying to introduce forces in that tissue that they hope will mimic what goes on in the real world. And there's a huge disconnect there, but this is a first attempt working with them to try to understand, well, what are these forces and are what they're doing appropriate for what we want at our end. So in looking at resistance exercise, and thanks, Trent, because you set the stage for me, and whoever asked the question about different types of exercise, it gets really complex quickly. And we decided, instead of looking at what you do across the month or the years or the weeks or across an entire session, we need to start with just a single repetition. And so we came up with this schematic that illustrates how complex it can be. And if you have any physics background, this is like high school physics 101 on one level. But if you look at, for example, what's in the lavender color, the mass and the velocity and the distance, those are things that we routinely adjust and control when we go and do an exercise session. But we see all of those factors, when we change them, they affect so many characteristics of what you're doing. And we haven't even left repetition 1 yet. So now how do we actually understand everything? Because it gets complex really quickly. And I think a lot of these things are minuscule and maybe not of importance, but I think it kind of depends on what you're training for. So to help us understand this a little bit, we can go into the laboratory. We can stand on force plates that are big, expensive. We have data acquisition systems. We can get cameras recording. We can put sensors on the bars or the weight stacks or the dumbbells. We can use all the technology, or we can take what has been developed in the last 18 years of data in the scientific literature, as well as unpublished data from our laboratory, and we can create a model that we'll see here, maybe and maybe not. So I don't know how to navigate to it. Well, okay.
Explain what you're doing.
So let me back up a slide. Let's see, backspace, close this. Where is the close? Okay. Let's stop share. Right there. Oh, down here. Okay. Well, what I'll do is I'll go to here to wrap up because I know my time is limited. So in 1 minute, what we developed was at this level, we're just using an Excel spreadsheet, which includes numerous statistical calculations on existing data. So you can enter the characteristics of an individual, their height, their weight, what exercise it is, what's the range of motion they're going to perform, how strong are they, what is the weight on the bar, and then it calculates out the powers, the forces, the velocities, the mechanical work, the impulse, the variables such as yanks, such as muscle and tendon stiffness and so forth, which you can estimate then what is actually going on with the particular repetition. If we understand that, then we can move on to the next level, which is looking at the entire training session and an entire training, for example, a year, something like that. It also gives information for the researcher in the lab in San Diego, what kind of forces are the tissues being exposed to, and does it transfer to what their needs are? And it allows us to make some very simple comparisons on commonly used programs. This was all derived from the calculated data comparing a standard workout of 3 sets of 10 versus a commonly used alternative where you lift the weights very slowly. And people say, well, that's a much better way to lift. But when you actually do the calculations, every single argument that's made for it, it's like, well, not necessarily. Doesn't mean it's bad, but it means it's not what people say it is. And so it helps you make sense out of a really complex and confusing world of exercise. So this is just an example of how we've put it to use. Thank you. The Excel sheet really is cool.
Any, two things. Wonder if you know anything what the thing is. Secondly, you do a commercial.
Yeah. Yeah. So the question is, how does this tie in with what they're doing in San Diego? How they've been able to use it? And our lab is down in Robinson. I do know that there will be a school assembly, I believe next month, and we'll have an open house then right afterwards. So just come down the hall. But our doors are open anytime because it's kind of a, for me, it's like going to the candy store every single day. I mean, it's a fun, we do fun stuff. And if you are at all interested in sport or exercise, we love to show what's going on. In San Diego, what they're doing right now is at the very rudimentary level, because in the muscle cell and cells, all the cells of the body, they respond to a stimulus. In this case, it's exercise. And so in their models, they're trying to look at, for example, certain proteins that signal certain events and how do they turn on or turn off. And one of the stimuli is the force that they're exposed to. And we just, if you saw that beautiful Excel sheet, but you saw the diagram, it gets complex. What kind of force? The magnitude of the force, the duration of the force, how rapidly it increases or decreases, etc. And so they're trying to find out what are the most potent signals for certain proteins. And it carries over into the health and disease issue, not just sport performance. So, barely hitting the tip of the iceberg. This is stuff that'll go on for a long time, but it's pretty exciting. Thanks.
We're going to take just a really quick stretch break, and we'll start up at 1:05. So just take a minute, grab another bite to eat. Bio break as you need to, and we'll start right up in 2 minutes. Good afternoon. So the study that I'm talking about emerged from a collaboration with one of our master's students. They were interested in doing research. A lot of my research is LGBT related. They worked in the sexual violence prevention office, and we started talking about what are those intersections. And what we realized was, particularly in relation to LGBTQ college students and LGBTQ people broadly, all of the conversations, all of the research about relationships was talking about sexual violence, was talking about trauma, was talking about challenges and obstacles. And there really wasn't anything that talked about joy and love and celebration and the ways that folks were actually having these relationships in healthy, effective ways. And so that became the focus for our study. And the way we approached the study was as a photo voice study. And one of the things that became really interesting as we engaged the study is I feel like going through all my methods courses, even teaching methods courses, we talk about with a qualitative study, you need to have participant pseudonyms. You don't want to know who people are. You want people to be unidentifiable. And so when we started this, we told students like, submit photos that don't include you. Like, we want to make sure that you're not identifiable. And pretty quickly, we got a lot of pushback. Students were like, but I want to be visible. I want people to see us. And it really created a lot of questions and conversations for us of what does that mean and what does that look like ethically? When IRB says, make sure you have a pseudonym, and the student says, please publish this photo of me with a sign about to get my first T shot for transitioning with gender. Like, how did we balance those things? And as we thought about it, we really took the approach that if students wanted to share that and wanted to be known and wanted to be seen, that it wasn't our place to really gatekeep that and say, hey, we're trying to keep you invisible, when the whole goal of our study was actually promoting and supporting visibility of healthy, intimate relationships. So some of the photos here represent photos that students shared with us. And the ways that they provided photos, we had people provide a general photo about their relationship, and then we gave folks a list of words. A lot of the words came from the idea from Bell Hooks and the ways that she talks about and thinks about conceptions of love, which is in the quote that I have here. And we told students to pick some words and provide photos of communication, of care, of conflict. And then they had an opportunity to talk about what those photos were, why they'd selected them, how that manifested within their relationships. And the paper that I'm talking about today was really our first paper that emerged from this study, because as we were doing it, students kept talking about love languages. I imagine if I asked most of you, you would say, oh, I'm physical touch, or I'm acts of service, because it's become such a common conversation within society and how people talk about relationships. But what we realized with the way that the students were talking is it really moved beyond the initial conception of how people talked about love languages, which, if folks haven't researched the background, actually came from a religious pastor who provided this as a foundation for thinking about ways people should approach research or relationships, and it was particularly anti-LGBT. But as students were talking, they were using this consistently to talk about relationships. But what we found as we engaged additional analysis of their conversations was that they were doing so in much deeper ways. One of the stories that really stood out was a participant who talked about gift giving. And the participant's partner had transitioned gender during their relationship. Their partner was assigned male at birth, and during the course of their relationship, came out as transgender, as a woman. And this participant was talking about having a background as a seamstress and how they took their partner's Catholic school uniform and used the Catholic school uniform to make the first dress for their partner. Which, yes, is an act of gift giving, but the ways that we really talked about it and analyzed were the ways that students were actually really engaging recognition, deep understanding of one another that really goes beyond like, hey, I bought you some flowers for Valentine's Day, but really centered like the deep awareness of who people were and the flexibility and shifts that took place within their relationships
not only to create possibility models for LGBT students thinking about relationships, but really hopefully pushing all of us to think differently about how we complicate and engage thinking about relationship conversations. How did we deal with IRB? I was really surprised when we asked IRB, there actually wasn't any pushback. And it was just, I think, our own internal assumptions of things that we'd been trained and socialized with research. IRB was like, well, if they consent and they want to do it. So then when students submitted photos, we literally added a box of, I consent that you can use this photo. If there's anybody else included in this photo, I've asked their permission. And so for every photo, students ended up submitting those for us. But I was really surprised at how easy the IRB conversation went. Looking about like the importance of different characteristics in relationships and the importance of different characteristics. I think some of the things that really emerged interestingly with this study really was thinking about intersections of identities and the fluidity of identity, not just around sexuality and gender, but also students having a lot of conversations around ability, of what does it mean to navigate our relationship if my partner has high anxiety, and how do I support that within different contexts? And so really the deep communication and authenticity that people had. And maybe if I interviewed straight college students of a similar age group, they'd have similar experiences. But we felt really surprised at just like the level of self-awareness and the depth of conversations that students were having with one another in shifting and creating their relationships, as opposed to being narrowly confined. It was like, oh, well, we started and I identified this way, but then I was asexual. So then we had to negotiate what that meant for us physically. And if that shifts our physical intimacy, then maybe we need to explore polyamory so that my partner's needs can be met. And just like hearing the ways that students were negotiating and navigating the conversations and fluidity around identity, I think those are the two that really stood out as surprising and interesting. Thank you.
Brian is up and he's doing it via Zoom. So let me. Is this Brian's? Okay. Now how do I? And Brian, do you want to come off, unmute yourself and see if we can hear you? I don't know what happened to the video. Hold on, Zach, we'll figure this out. Can we unmute Brian? Brian, we're trying to unmute you here. Oh, wait,
Okay,
you talk?
can everybody hear me?
Yes.
We got you, yep.
All right.
Okay.
Well, all right. Thanks, everyone. Sorry I can't be here in person, but what I wanted to talk about was some of the research that me and a colleague at the University of North Florida, his name is Dr. Jason Lee, have been doing with Home Field Apparel. Home Field Apparel is located in Indianapolis, Indiana. They are a retro collegiate apparel provider. So they were kind of a startup company that got into making apparel for collegiate programs around 2017. Just a little bit of background. This is an extremely competitive space. There, as you probably know, a lot of the main players, Nike, Adidas, Under Armour, have kind of dominated the apparel and licensing business. So their story is really interesting because they were a startup in 2017. For the first couple of years, they really languished. I think at one point, the CEO talked about only having $500 in their bank account. They weren't really sure how much longer they were going to make it. And then just by a stroke of luck, they came up with a really brilliant kind of advertising campaign called Big New Saturday. And they ended up getting a number of licensing agreements with a number of Power 5 schools. And now today, they've gained a pretty significant amount of market share in the collegiate apparel space. And they have licensing agreements with pretty much every Power 5 school except a couple and most Division I programs. So this is part of a larger process or project where we're really looking at the recipe for their success as a startup. So, you know, what can we learn about their marketing? What can we learn about kind of their strategy? Their approach to social media is really unique. But today, what I want to focus on is just their design process. So how did they come up with the designs for some of their different apparels for the schools that they provide for? So up in the top left corner, you'll see my hometown university, University of Illinois. That was their entire line that they released on Big New Saturday about a year ago. Hopefully you can see some of those different designs and see just kind of the diversity in terms of apparel that they offer, and then some of those different logos. So part of this just was talking to the CEO, talking to their designers, talking to the social media manager, and really diving into that design process for each school. So the part that was unsurprising was a lot of their research is done online. They use a lot of media guides, a lot of things they find on Google, and a lot of things on kind of archival videos to find different logos and designs. We kind of expected that. We thought also maybe they might visit different campuses as well to find inspiration, but pretty much they said a lot of what they found they can find online and through archival video, and college media guides have been a great source. The part that really surprised us though was how they utilized their customer base to come up with inspirations for design. So that second box there is the Varsity Club, which is kind of a members only group. It's targeted for people who have spent a significant amount of money on home field apparel. I'm unfortunately a member of that group based on how much I've spent buying apparel. But it's been really interesting to see how they've used that app and how they've used that community to generate ideas when they're getting ready to launch for different schools. Also, they have a number of, I don't know if you would call them influencers, but they have a number of people at different schools that they consult with when they're coming up with different apparel lines for different schools. And they really lean on their expertise and their institutional knowledge when generating these different apparel lines. So I'll give you an example with the University of Colorado. One of the worst kept secrets in retro apparel is powder blue always kills. It's always one of the top sellers in almost any apparel line that they ever do. There's something about the color and the connection to the past, but Colorado used powder blue during a very unsuccessful part of their history. And I think the fan base really responded negatively to when they implemented powder blue, I think in the 80s, into some of their uniform designs. So kind of through that process, they realized, well, maybe we shouldn't add something powder blue to the Colorado line. So that kind of utilization of talking to fans, talking to customers, and understanding what works and what doesn't based on the specificity of the institution, we found really interesting. The second thing that was really interesting, connect consumers with a time and place, most likely a time and place that was successful in their history in athletics. So in this particular instance, basically any shirt that has national champions on it or celebrates a very important moment in time in the program is always one of their top sellers. So that Colorado shirt is an example of kind of national champs. And we researched this, but they don't read our research, or at least they haven't to this point, but they just understood that how important it is to connect fans with successful time and place. On the bottom left there, they just unveiled this year quarter zips. So that Duke piece of apparel is a quarter zip. So how did the quarter zip come about? It hasn't been in any of their collections before. All of that was through customer listening. So they put out a survey to everybody who has bought home field apparel in the past. And two things came out of it. One, we need joggers for every school. So like sweatpants that are really comfortable. Every school should have a pair with a cool retro logo. The second thing was they were clamoring for quarter zips as something to add to their apparel line. So in their current kind of refreshes of some schools, you're seeing the quarter zip being an offering in all of their new apparel lines with some of the schools they're working with. The other thing that's really interesting is this.
Brian, one more minute.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. The other thing that's really interesting is the storytelling. So the amount of research they do that goes into each design. When you go on their website, it's become so much more intricate telling the story behind the brands. They even have put out now like a newsletter. There's the one with the Yukon Huskies, where they're really talking about the history behind the Yukon Husky logo. Last thing I want to mention is the ecosystem for getting licensing and apparel approved. It's a really interesting process. There's a lot of gatekeeping that goes on, and licensing offices are used to working with, Nike, Adidas, who put out just a significant amount of apparel with a very generic logo, and there's not a lot of thought put into it. So they've had to be very strategic because they are a direct-to-consumer brand and they customize all their offerings. There's been a lot of kind of back and forth and relationship building to get some of that licensing approved by the various schools. So it's part of a larger project, but I just want to talk a little bit about Home Field Apparel's design process as a part of what we're doing. And the first publication we're going to have on this is in a book chapter in a book called Branded that's going to talk about the home field story and kind of their humble roots, I would say. So thank you, everyone. And I'm open for questions.
Thanks, Brian. Do I have questions for Brian? We're all applauding, Brian. Any questions I can pass through to him? Okay. Thank you, Brian. Appreciate your being able to do this with us. Jenny, you're up. Jenny and Allison are up. Which I don't know. I don't know which one is you. Okay, hopefully I do.
Ooh, but I don't want all the little notey notes. All right. So I'm Jennifer Kurth. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Special Education, and my colleague, Allison.
Hi, I'm Allison Zagona. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Special Education.
And we're going to share a little bit of the work we did with our research funding from last year, actually. So what we've been interested in doing is getting together work to do IES funded project related to improving outcomes for students with the most significant support needs. And so one of the things that we've been thinking about and kind of preparing for this project is that a lot of schools, and we are thinking about 23% of schools are implementing multi-tiered systems of support that have a tiered approach essentially to supporting students with behavior or academic or other needs that has a lot of evidence in terms of supporting outcomes for students in terms of behavior, communication, social skills, academic skills. One of the things that troubles us though is that the tier 1 supports, which is supposed to be for all students, all staff, all places of the school, are often actually not accessible to students with most significant support needs because they're programmatically and physically excluded from those general spaces. And yet we hypothesize that by participating in these tier 1 activities, which include teaching kids what are the rules and expectations, acknowledging their behavior, and giving them access to those spaces could potentially really improve their outcomes too. And so that's sort of the premise of this IES proposal that we're developing for the summer. But what we needed to do was to start to understand, what's currently happening in terms of tier 1 supports for students with the most extensive support needs now, given that there's really been a dearth of research in this area. And so we, and Allison will talk about the details, but we actually used all of our funding to purchase a Qualtrics panel in which we were able to get a large sample of survey respondents from around the country that if you haven't thought about purchasing a Qualtrics panel, I would recommend it. It's a great way to get, a high response rate and get a lot of good data. So I'll turn it over to Allison. I don't know if I've got anything else.
Yeah, so we wanted to try in our survey to understand the extent to which educators believe that students with complex support needs should participate in school-wide PBIS. The extent to which teachers have the knowledge to support the involvement of students with complex support needs in those practices like teaching behavioral expectations, providing rewards, making sure that students know what's expected in different settings of the school. And then we also wanted to know the extent to which teachers engage in practices that support the involvement of students in these school-wide PBIS associated practices. So we separated the teacher responses according to whether the teachers reported being at a school that implements school-wide PBIS or not. And we learned that teachers working in school-wide PBIS schools have more knowledge of how to handle the behavior support needs of students with complex support needs. We also learned that students with complex support needs who are taught in schools that have these types of behavioral supports like school-wide PBIS are more involved in the practices, which kind of makes sense. If the practices are happening, the students tend to be more involved in those types of strategies and practices. And then we also learned that teachers believe that students with complex support needs should be involved in school-wide PBIS practices. And that was a really important finding for us because some of the earlier research on this has shown some mixed results, and there's been some confusion among whether people think that students with complex support needs should have only individualized behavior support plans just for them, or should they be a part of these school-wide prevention-based strategies? And so we learned that these teachers in this large sample believe that they should be involved in these practices. And then, so we have some implications of our findings.
So we found basically that the implementation of school-wide PBIS might be a catalyst essentially for improving inclusive practices. So greater access to tier 1 supports. If teachers know better how to do it, they're feeling like it's beneficial to students, that might be a really great place a place for us to work to improve outcomes for students. And so we're excited about that. And we also found that another kind of implication is that teachers in schools implementing school-wide PBIS are more knowledgeable about how to manage behavior in general, but among students with complex support needs in particular, which again is important to us because we know from other research that one of the main reasons kids get kicked out of classrooms or excluded from general spaces is because of engaging in challenging behavior. And if teachers in these settings are better able to, but have better skills and knowledge, that can reduce the need to exclude and segregate kids as well. So we're excited to hopefully turn this around as some foundational knowledge for the proposal we're writing this summer. So thank you all. Yeah, we didn't really talk about that. What we're thinking about doing is a development and innovation grant project in which we would think about how we can adapt tier 1 practices. So teaching expectations, posting expectations, those sorts of things to make them accessible to everybody. And that if it's, that could be a way to make sure that students are better able to be participating in those activities. And so having some basic knowledge to get at first, that we think that participating will improve outcomes. So we'll also be measuring distal and proximal student outcomes as well to see if their participation in tier 1, which could be enhanced through making these adaptations to tier 1, could further benefit students more specifically. Yeah, thank you. We'll need it.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Do you?
I have it with my script.
disregard the picture because my PowerPoint slide is probably the most boring one. It does not want to show here. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very impressed by all the wonderful projects everyone is presenting here. By the way, for those who do not know me, my name is Han Yinglao. I'm an associate professor at the Department of Educational Psychology and director of the Center for Research Methods Consultation. I'm here to introduce that center for you guys and also call for something from you guys. You know, as a researcher or maybe a practitioner, there are always times when you need some assistance with the research methods, maybe data collection, data analysis, you know, measurement, validation, something like that. This is when you need to turn to the Center for help. So some of you probably know that the center was launched last September under the support from the School Education and Human Sciences. I want to say Human Resources, that's wrong. And the Achievement and Assessment Institute. So it is, I always want to describe that as a centralized effort providing consultation services for faculty members, students, and research staff on campus and off campus, which is a long-term vision about the research methods. We also support funded projects by providing shared graduate research assistants who are good at research methods and for whom we also provide supervision and mentoring. Just trying to look at my notes just in case I missed something. Talking about the long-term visions for the center, we want to build it as a center for all kinds of methods and all kinds of approaches, not only just to focus on statistics or quantitative ones. At the same time, we want to provide services you know, in the future for on-campus and off-campus people who have the needs, like some community organization or some evaluation centers who need some support with the research methods and things like that. For everyone at the School Education and Human Sciences, depending on your budget source, the service could be free. And with again, when you come for a center for some services, we will not charge you anything in the front. If you want us to help with your publications, we probably want you to add any consultant as a secondary author on the manuscript if this person warrants that. For the grant proposals you're working on, if we help you write the research methods or evaluation parts, we ask that you write our internal reads as a part of your grant budget, as simple as that. Of course, like I said, we also provide graduate studentship for all kinds of funded services. Just to give you a picture of what we have served since last September, we got requests from a lot of units on campus, such as, of course, besides our School of Education, we also have faculty members and students from class, psychology students, you know, linguistic students. We also have people from social welfare, engineering, and a couple of centers at the Lifespan Institute. A couple of examples, there's a Spanish professor who is interested in coding language by using music notes. How wonderful is that? He asked for help to find the patterns for the music notes. That's a small project and focus on the publication. And we're also involved in a big project, NSF Engineering Research Center, which will have tens of millions of dollars budget for that one. We are leading the evaluation effort for that. And another example is we also provide 2 graduate students for KU CDD. And here, I would imagine you will share this information of our center with others. I would imagine there may be more requests of surveys in the future. Then we need more human resources. So all the human resources are from you guys. If any of you here are interested in joining us, please just let me know. I think it's a good opportunity for you to showcase or hone your research skills by involving in this project, these exciting projects on campus or off campus. It is maybe an opportunity to get a little bit summer money. Plus, it is always fun to work together as a group. Thank you. Oh, by the way, my email is hlong@ku.edu if you want to reach out. Yeah. Center for Research Methods. I have a website. If you see, it's on my PowerPoint slide. Yeah, crmc.ku.edu. So it's a Center for Research Methods Convocation. It says something like that. Yes, we mentioned a graduate. Did I forget? Yeah, just encourage your graduate students if they need any assistance with their dissertation. We did have a lot from psychology and other places. Yeah, I mean. Yes, broad. Yeah, broad for sure. Yeah, we want to, in a long vision, we want to build this and to be a multi-method center. We don't want it to just focus on quantity. So that's why we need you. I have mostly like quantitative methodology background, a little bit mixed method, not really. I can do qualitative, but not really good one. So I need a lot of help. Plus, remember, this is a centralized effort. It's not my center, it's all of your center. So we can build this up together. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks everyone for hanging around. My name is Jordan Bass. I'm in health, sport, and exercise science. I'm here to talk to you about, I'm not standing. I'm here to talk to you about one of my, they'll be fine. I'm here to talk about one of my big passions, which is youth sport. And so when I come into the classroom, what do you think about when I say youth sports? It's typically something like this is what students know. It's orange slices, it's getting everybody in the town, dividing them up by teams, and taking those teams and splitting them up. If you're playing a season and maybe your mom or dad or guardian parents company sponsor the team, and then at the end of the year, everybody gets together. So when you typically think of youth sports, that's what you think of. But that's changed. And any of you that have had people in youth sports or played youth sports can understand. In some ways, maybe it looks like this now.
The teams I play with, the Senators from Philadelphia. I played in this tournament called Perfect Game, Crossbar Dugout, Houston Banditos, Young Guns Elite. This is my oldest hat I ever had. I had this since I was 6 or 7. Yeah, I play with, they're called the Cleveland Cavaliers, which is my high school. But you're not in high school? No. In 5th grade. I like everything. I like hitting, fielding, running. I like all of it equally. Most of the time I get more positive comments than negative. Never see the negative comments. Makes me just work harder.
So you can see we're talking about two wildly different things here, from orange slices to Instagram pages, from teams divided up by what age group you're in to how talented you are and what opportunities are available for you. But unfortunately, in the sport management literature, youth sports is still treated as this giant blob. So every article we read to say we interviewed people, parents in youth sports or coaches in youth sports, but there's no typology that exists that lets me know, okay, what type of youth sport organization is this? We've done this with Division III sports as well to try and develop a typology for that. But there's this perception that's this one big blob, but it's really not. And it's pretty obvious in that regard. If you were to research Division I sport, you'd want to know, is it a Power 5? Is it a non-Power 5? What type of sport is it? all these different things that exist. And so through this project, we're trying to develop these different typologies because they are very, very different. And I'll use my 2 kids as an example. So on the right here is my son playing school basketball. So they practice once a week. It's everybody who wants to play in the school gets to play. And then they play 5 or 6 games in the fall, 5 or 6 games in the spring, and their season's over. On the left is my daughter, who are deep in gymnastics season right now. So about every weekend, we're all over the state, all over the region. She's in the gym 8 hours a week. And it's a much different setup. But in the youth sport research, these 2 settings are treated the exact same. And so the research in this area is, as you can imagine, very hard to read, very hard to garner any really implications from. So our goal is to develop this typology. And what we're using as a baseline, as an example, is our baseball club that we created here in Lawrence. And so what we're doing is we've created this large database of youth sport coaches and youth sport administrators across the US and sent them the survey that says, do you do these different things? How does your club select players? Where do they come from? What are your costs? What are your coaches? How are they trained? Right? Do you have sponsors? Do you have photographers? What media do you have? All these different things that will help us as we get these responses, divide then these groups into these different typologies. So when we do research on youth sports, we can say it's a youth sport organization that is X. It's a youth sport organization that is Y. And that will help us as we try to garner implications from this research of what we can do. Because the youth sports space is very, very different than it's ever been. Even 10 years ago, the majority of recreation youth sports budgets in a city were devoted to the actual people in the city that were playing. So we take that money, we'd hire coaches, we'd create leagues. Now we've shifted to sport for tourism. That's where we spend our money now. So Rock Chalk Park's a great example. If you've ever been out to Sports Pavilion, we build these beautiful facilities. This is going to sound critical, and it's, I guess, meant to be, but not the point. We build these beautiful facilities, and then we use it to generate money from outside constituents. So the money that was going to youth leagues, we've kind of ceded that to the private side. We said, we'll let private organizations like me run these clubs, whatever. We're going to build these beautiful facilities and try to bring in outside groups to come to to come to our town, right? And a lot of towns, especially in the Midwest, are using this as a way to generate revenue for their town, their city, trying people to come. So it's a very interesting and complex time in youth sports because it's not being run now from the public side. In fact, the public options are usually quite bad, except for some select spots. It's all privatized, and us understanding which type of organization we're in is really, really important. So things like these of what we've seen so far, some of the responses we've seen that we started to divide them up by. The legitimacy of the organization, how long lasting is it? Do they have multiple teams? What do they do in terms of trainings and coaches? What's the time commitment required? What's the startup cost? What are your recurring costs? What's your level of competition? These are all things that we're going to use that we're getting from these coaches and these administrators to group them into different levels so that when we actually do youth sports research moving forward, because it has become a $1 billion business. That video that I showed you is from a Times article called How Youth Sports Became a $1 billion business. We actually know what groups we're talking about. We're not comparing the 8-year-olds that are divided up by what school district they're in against the 8-year-olds that are competing across the country. Thanks. Yeah, good. Thanks. Yeah. 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 I mean, right now where it's, yeah. Kelly asked how many different typologies there are. Right now we're at 6. So we have the main public option where you sign up, the cost is less than $100. You're put on a team based on what parent signs up to coach or what school district you're in or what part of town you live in. That's probably on this end, right? To the far end typology where we have people saying we have a tryout rate and acceptance rate of less than 10%. Yeah, and that'd be cheap, right? And so we have these 2 ends, and then there's groups in the middle, right? And that's kind of the point is people view it as these 2 ends, but there's these large differences in the middle, right? There's these things in the middle where people charge a lot, but it's supplemented by sponsors or by other things. Or they have where they don't charge at all, but there's all these expectations that exist. And the commitment you have to make is through time, and it really limits who's there. Right, that's a good question. I imagine we'll end up with 6 to 8 is where I think we're tracking. Andy.
What are the implications for Parks and Recreation Department?
Yeah.
Like Warren
Yeah.
said, my child plays on now they're not very good. And, we go from there.
Yeah, I mean, the implications for what I challenge my students to do in our sport management classes, I get up and get on my soapbox and say, take this training and go to your communities and develop an affordable option. It is not that hard. It's really not. But we have decided as municipalities, we're going to use that money, even the limited money that we have, to try and use it to generate more money and not to serve our community. So for example, in Lawrence, there's barely a youth sports program for soccer that's public. There's none for baseball, right? It's coaches like Trent and I that run teams within our Meadowlarks organization that then pay the city to play in their leagues, but all they do is provide umpires. So if you don't have the means or even the wherewithal to find a coach, your player's not ever playing. So it's really come to a privatized section to where even at the high school level, we've kind of given up. We've kind of said, okay, we can't compete. We're going to let the private area take over. And that's, to me, a bad thing, but that's not this presentation. Yeah.
Years ago, worked with someone said from soccer, or football over there.
Yeah.
It's definitely a move on.
Yeah.
That in America.
Yeah.
And so how many years you know behind them? You don't have the resources.
Most.
to
Yeah.
pay
Yeah.
to do something.
Yeah, no, and that's the issue why I'm so passionate about it, right? I grew up in the middle of nowhere, Nebraska, where we played in this public model. I would have never played basketball. I played tennis in college. I would have never started playing tennis if there weren't free public courts and free leagues to do so, right? My mom wasn't hauling me around to what I'm hauling my kids around to do now, I promise, right? So we're leaving a big group of people behind. And in the research, we're only focusing on the large groups of private institutions that exist largely because they're the ones we can find. Right? I do an example in my class where I put up a public website, the Lawrence Parks and Rec, and the local private option. And it's like, as a parent, which one would you want to enroll your kid in? Right? Because the legitimacy of these organizations, especially on the public level, is just becoming so low. It's hard if I was a parent to justify doing that if I wanted my kid to have the opportunity, even if it exists at all. Thank you.
I want to thank everyone for coming and thanks to the folks who showed up via Zoom. We tried to repeat the questions, but so I hopefully you see the array of the kind of research that's being done in the school. Again, I want to encourage everyone to apply for a School of Ed and Human Sciences research grant or summer funding. You will be voluntold to participate in this next year if you do, but I think it's well worth it. And we also encourage anyone, you don't have to have School of Ed funding to participate next year. So think about whether you are willing to do it. This is right. I was just going to say it's open for folks who are presenting research, but also opportunities like Hying did, as well as research or teaching innovations as well. So